Hello and welcome back to the Ladies Wrestling Griot podcast. On this last day of November, the Ladies Wrestling Griot podcast is wrapping up our awesome WCW themed month and talking about the ladies' involvement in WCW from the years of 1998 through 2001. Now, there are a lot of opinions about anything that was happening in WCW from 98 to 2001. There were a lot of highs and a lot of lows during this time. But one thing is for sure, there were certainly a lot of memorable moments during these years. So let's just hop right into it because there's actually a lot to cover about what women were doing in the company at the time. So let's start off with the WCW Women's Cruiserweight division. This is something that's not usually mentioned a lot because, one, like many things that women were doing in the business in the 90s, a lot of things that could potentially have been great were cut short. So the Cruiserweight division for the women was of no exception. But the reason why I wanted to start off with this was because at the beginning of this month, we talked about the WCW Women's Heavyweight Championship. And even though that was also short-lived, it showed what amazing talent was around the world and what WCW could have had the potential of doing with having such strong veterans be a part of that division. And with the Cruiserweight division, and the Women's Cruiserweight division, I think that it potentially showed, just like the men's cruiserweight division, what was the young talent that were coming out that could really build an entire division around. And after the impressive showing from the women of the WCW heavyweight title roster, WCW thought it'd be a good idea to also create a cruiserweight division in 98. And I felt that this would benefit WCW for many reasons. One, it could provide content for the secondary shows like WCW Worldwide and have women compete for a prestigious new title, especially if they would hold it in the same caliber as the men's cruiserweight division, which we all know really helped to justify many times why you could have so many segments with the NWO because of how the men's cruiserweight division was putting a lot of asses in seats, to be honest, and the women could have done that. And I think another reason why this cruiserweight division for the women could have benefited WCW is because it could have done a great job of showcasing the young, budding American indie and Japanese female wrestlers that were on the scene, but they still needed a push. They still needed to get their name out there, essentially, and get some TV time to gain more experience and popularity. You had women like Meiko Satomura or Toshiye Oyematsu, Malaya Hosaka, and others that really received a great response from the crowd when they were a part of this WCW Women's Cruiserweight division. On April 7 of 1997, episode of WCW Worldwide, Toshiye defeated Malaya Hosaka in the tournament to finalize who would be the Cruiserweight titles champion. And her reign was for 103 days. And that's pretty impressive. But as we know, many times when the women would hold titles, the champs would actually have it for a long time, but they weren't on TV to really have that weekly representation of how they were as champs. So even though you would have these oppressive times for their reigns, you didn't really see that play out in real time. They would just be holding the titles. So on July 19th at a Gaia Championship Japan event, Yokosha Tamara defeated Toshiye and became the Cruiserweight champion, and her reign was 63 days. On September 30th, 1997, Sugar Sato defeated Yokoshi and became champion. She was champion until the title was deactivated. Now, at an unknown date in 1997, Gaia Japan and WCW parted ways and left the title abandoned. To our knowledge, and from what I believe, I don't think this was ever discussed on Eric Bischoff's podcast, 83 Weeks, on why Gaia Japan and WCW parted ways. This has happened many times with New Japan as well, where you would have a lot of their talent doing things or possibly holding an American title. And then all of a sudden the title would just be deactivated. There wouldn't be any discussions about it. And it was because at that time, usually both companies weren't doing business together anymore. So for what we know, it could have just been a very respectful party and they just decided to go their own ways. I'm kind of thinking that a lot of bookers and the creative heads in WCW weren't that hot about having a women's division. And then on the side of Gaia Japan's promotion, they got a lot of what they wanted from this relationship, and they were thriving in Japan. These women were putting on amazing matches and really helping to grow their company around the 97, 99, or maybe I should say the middle of 98 during their partnership with WCW. So they essentially got out of that deal what they needed to. So I'm pretty sure there weren't any hard feelings when they decided to part ways, but it really didn't help that with the women having either the WCW Heavyweights Championship active and the Cruiserweight Championship active, that I feel that that could have really helped just WCW as a whole have so many great segments on the show and really had titles that really meant something. Because the men's cruiserweight division, I can't say throughout the entire tenure of WCW, but in its peak years between 96 and coincidentally, maybe like the middle of 98, 99, that was the title to have, just like it was in WCW for the Intercontinental Championship. That was the title that you wore when everyone knew that you were a wrestler's wrestler. And they could have had that for the women. So that would have definitely helped to campaign for women having a very stable spot on the roster. But of course, that didn't last. But I think for shows like WCW Worldwide, we really try to get the fans involved because many times they may not, it's a secondary show. So sometimes they don't know, the fans don't know who might be performing and if they would actually enjoy it. These type of matches really help to build some momentum for that. So even though it didn't last long, this was something that clearly has to be highlighted for women's involvement in WCW at that time. So after we see the end to the women's cruiserweight division, we still have Medusa attempting to reach new heights in her career in WCW. After having a strong showing with trying to get the WCW Women's Heavyweight Championship, and after leaving Team Madness, or should I say being fired from Team Madness, Medusa set her sights on making huge strides with competing with the men in the company. She had stated while she was in Team Madness that this was a goal of hers, and clearly she stuck with it. She dusted herself off after the very rude parting that she had from Macho Man from Team Madness, and she just decided to get back in the ring and do what she does best. And at the beginning of 1999, she got her wish granted and she entered into the men's heavyweight title tournament. Now, this is her first attempt at trying to get the men's title, and this is around November of 1999. Now, wrestling fans at that time were watching both WWE and WCW. No question about it. No one, as far as the fans, they weren't really gung-ho on just watching one promotion. So it was pretty much known that the strides of China trying to make sure that she was fighting any competitor, but specifically really wanting to tap into the fact that she could compete with the guys, was bringing on a new language in wrestling as to should we rate based on gender how entertaining, how appealing a match could be with a woman if clearly the fans could actually believe that they could stand toe to toe with men. So I think the same question was being posed in WCW, and clearly Medusa had no problem answering that. So on November 1st, 1999's Nitro, Medusa faced off with her first competition, which was a cruiserweight style wrestler named Evan Courageous for the WCW Heavyweight Championships tournament. And Evan made it clear that there was a clear attraction that he had to her, and you could see it all throughout this match that he was just smitten over Medusa. And of course, when Medusa was interviewed before the match, she just made it clear that she understood where the powers that be were trying to do to her. They were trying to give her these matches that either didn't showcase her properly or wouldn't be taken that seriously by the guys that she was actually wrestling. So she decided that coming into this match, she was going to use Evan's desire to be with her to her advantage. And she came into the match completely flirting with him and trying to take his mind off of the match. And she used her womanly ways to play with Chris's mind and to get him to feel that he was going to get laid instead of actually get the loss for this match. And he actually laid down on the mat and let her get the win. And I think I don't know, and I'm just gonna go and say that I don't think that this was, of course, Medusa's idea, because right after Evan laid down, Medusa gave him this long kiss, and she won, so she advanced in the tournament. But they were clearly making it clear that Evan and Medusa were going to be an item instead of showing a match where they were really competing to see who was the best and who could advance in the tournament. So unlike this interaction between Evan and Medusa in this match, the next week on Nitro, Medusa fought Chris Benoit. And her opponent was, of course, all business in the ring. And Medusa brings this aggression and fortitude to be aggressive, and Benoit just treats her like a joke. She did some awesome judo kicks and her karana to show off her skills, but a vicious chop took out Medusa. And after that, she's just laying out on the turnbuckle corner, and Evan Courageous comes out trying to come to her rescue. And then Jeff Jarrett comes out, because at this time he's really playing on what was done in WWE, where he was really making it clear, as many guys at that time did too, that he did not want to see women fight men in the ring. So clearly this was coming up also from the higher ups, and they just wanted to play on the fact that they were going to constantly foil Medusa's plans to ever really be showcased as a legit competitor for the men's heavyweight title. So Jeff Jarrett comes out, he interrupts the match, he moves the ref out of the way, and then he gets the mic at the end of the match after Medusa was disqualified, to make it clear that he was blatantly trying to ruin her chances of being a champ. So right after that, you see that Medusa is completely taken out of ever really going for the men's heavyweight title, but a budding relationship starts to transpire with her and Evan Courageous, but she still has her eyes on a men's title. This time it happens to be the cruiserweight title. And in her infamous match with Evan Courageous, they were technically at that point when they had the match, boyfriend and girlfriend. I mean, she did win the title, but just like I was saying, every time Medusa would have any type of accomplishment that dealt with her having any fights with men, it always had like this subtle undertone, well, not subtle, to very blatant tone that this isn't serious. We're mocking this title, that if it was on the waist of Rey Mysterio or Dean Malenko, then we would make this a 5-star match. But because it's on you, this isn't going to be taken as seriously. So that's exactly what happened with this match with Evan Courageous when Medusa won the title. And she did have the opportunity to defend it. She defended it against the bodybuilder turned wrestler Asia. She defended it many times, but obviously because it was seen as a joke on her, wasn't that long that she held the title. Then after that, for the rest of Medusa's stay in WCW, outside of humiliating incidents like, for example, the character of Oklahoma, who was um, obviously a very distasteful character that was made to make fun of JR, specifically having Oklahoma have where he's talking on one side of his face to mock JR's stroke that he had and how one side of his face was paralyzed. Yeah, this was WCW during this time, and they really did not pull back the punches on just having a lot of segments and characters that were clearly playing on very distasteful comedy, I guess you could say. And this commentator, Oklahoma, really had it in for Medusa, and they were very humiliating segments, including one match where Medusa had barbecue poured on her as she's trying to have a serious match, and they're just making it clear you will learn that you are here for eye candy. You may be a great wrestler, but we're not having you here for that. The landscape has changed in WCW for what you're going to be here to do. But even then, Medusa still honored her contract. She stayed with WCW and set her sights back on just trying to have matches with women that were of her caliber. She had great matches with Mona. She had great matches with a lot of legends that she had fought before in the past that they would bring in, but these matches didn't turn into feuds. They were just one-off shoots. So I would say Medusa's time from 98 to 2001 had highlights. Like, there are still great matches that you can find during that time that Medusa had because she just is that good. But they were always short stints. They were usually matches that didn't turn into feuds. And even I would say the chemistry that she had with Evan would have been great if they would have treated Medusa like, for example, how they treated Chyna when she was with Eddie Guerrero. They had their romantic relationship, but when Chyna had her matches, it was all business there. So, and then she was being taken seriously as a part of either the male roster or the female roster. She could go in and out. And I think that that's how they should have treated Medusa. But of course, we're all looking at this in hindsight, and some people really felt good about what they felt a woman's role in the company should have been at that time. But of course, even with these setbacks, Medusa is a Hall of Famer. So it still shows that even with all of those ups and downs that she had to go through in WCW, there are still a lot of matches that are talked about to this day. So that goes to show the professionalism that she had, as well as the lasting impact. So let's bring up now another former member of Team Madness, which is Mona. And as we later knew her as Molly Holly in WWE. So after being fired from Team Madness in such a harsh way, by the way, Miss Madness instantly became a fan favorite because of the way that Macho Man disgraced her after telling her that she would have no part of that stable anymore. And Mona really worked hard to show how much of an in-ring general she was. And I think that sets it apart. You can be able to have a good work rate, but Mona was shown early on that she could really take hold of a match and lead it. And I think that fans were really seeing that. And she has some impressive matches with Brandy Alexander, with Medusa, Little Genie, Lexi Fife, and Asia. I feel that Mona could have been a huge contributor for arguing that a women's division needed to come back to WCW program. As Mike Tenay said in a match that Mona was having with Lexi Fife at the time, he stated that Mona is revolutionizing American female wrestling and taking it to another level. I have to wholeheartedly agree with that because of what we saw that happened. Even when Mona became Molly Holly and she went to WWE, and how her contribution, which I don't think gets talked about enough. How she was able to lead matches, how she was able to push for certain storylines and certain matches that helped to bring in that women's division of the Ruthless Aggression era that set them apart. Everyone started having a certain tone to their wrestling programming at the time and started moving away from having the divas and the TNA aspect of the business because of the biggest wrestling company actually having women that were contributing that level of wrestling skill, that level of great storyline, that level of commitment to really building strong characters. And Mona was certainly a part of that. You can see the very early showings of that in WCW from 98 until I would say that Mona was in WCW into the mid 2000s because that's when she moved on to WWE. But you can really see that there was something very special about Mona. And even though you had the murkiness of this confusion as to what the women were supposed to be in the company and how they were constantly pushing to kind of battle with what the college crowds liked watching at the time and should they really push to have these women be extremely risque. Mona, with a lot of class, made it clear, I am here to wrestle. She wasn't being aggressive about it or anything. She was just making it clear, I'm here to wrestle. And it seemed like she had a lot of confidence in the fact that she didn't need to keep stating that. She just showed it in her wrestling, and the fans were really behind her. So just like the same issue that Medusa had was the same thing with Mona, where she, every time she had the ability to show what she could do, many times certain people that she was paired with, like the Brandy Alexanders, would really get the crowd going, but you might see them for 2 weeks and then they're off TV for a long time. So you can't really build up momentum. Every time you come back, the crowd loves it, but they're not seeing you on a weekly basis. So I think that that probably went into the decision that Mona had to go on to WWE, because when she did go, it was the right timing, because that's when WWE actually really wanted to build up a women's division that was strong and that had the ability to have wrestlers that could build up their baby faces, because you do need someone like Mona that has that type of in-ring general skill to really build up someone, let's say for instance, like it happened in WWE, like a Trish Stratus, like a Lita. So already in WCW, you can see how good she was. So I think that is definitely something that should be highlighted as a positive for women's involvement in WCW through 98 and 2001. So now I'm going to move on to someone that I absolutely loved. And it was so refreshing seeing someone like this, not just because, I'm obviously crazy about seeing women wrestling in the ring. It was also about how well done I felt her character was. And many times, our generation now with wrestling is kind of spoiled from this, but at this time, it was really hard to find a lot of women that had really strong characters, where it looked like they really went into trying to create an entire background for this character, and that it was hard to separate them from who the character was. And Daphne did an amazing job of incorporating that. And I am going to have a full episode on the very near future, by the way, probably early 2023, talking about the entire career of Daphne. I actually wanted to do this about a year ago, but after her death, I just personally, someone that was a huge fan of Daphne, I kind of needed time before I did that. I just wanted to make sure that it didn't look like I was trying to capitalize on talking about her once everyone else did, because I've literally been a fan of hers since 2000. So I think this is the right time to do that. But let's have a soft opening to that full-on episode that I have about Daphne by talking about her involvement in WCW. So with the debut of Daphne, came the introduction of a character that was so refreshing. Soon after accepting a contract with WCW, she debuted as the stalker of David Flair. David Flair was the golden hair child of the Nature Boy Ric Flair. He was designated to be next in line from the higher ups in WCW. He was supposed to be a squeaky clean top guy in the business. So I guess when WCW saw that that may not have worked for the fans because they weren't really getting behind David the way that they expected. I think that they felt like they needed to add a little bit of edge to him and kind of give him a different direction. So Daphne's influence on David Flair, I think, really helped him to get a little bit of a fan base and popularity after that. So let's backtrack. Daphne is introduced to WCW fans when she has segments where she's in a room and she has this whole sanctuary dedicated to David Flair. She has all these posters of him all around the room, and she's talking about her deep love for David Flair, and she is a fan. She's simply a fan at this point of David Flair, and of course, at this time, when you see this as a fan, there's no way you're not gonna think she's out of her mind. And what does WCW do? They make sure that not only can this person that is completely unhinged still love David Flair, let's bring her to the place in which he works and let's see how this goes. So you would think that David Flair would have been completely terrified of someone like Daphne having this deep obsession with him. But in a twist of events, she actually liked that attention and she struck a nerve with something in him that he felt like he had a connection to her. And these two became an on screen pair that I think worked. It worked for that. It was like something that worked at that point in time. I mean, we had films like Natural Born Killers where you just had people that were completely unhinged and they were head over heels for each other, and everyone else is just looking at them from the outside as if they needed to be committed to an asylum. And it just worked for these two. They also had Crowbar with them, and they just all really gelled, and the fans really liked her. Daphne would come out screeching with this loud scream. She had long jet black hair, self-made shirts that were, she had words that would kind of make fun of herself. She knew how to be the joke without people being annoyed with it. They actually thought, wow, you know how to laugh at yourself. You know how to have this bubbly yet wacky personality that really spoke to the portion of the audience that had a lot of female comic book like characters that they wanted to see in wrestling, but they didn't really get the chance to because most of the women were trying to worry about whether the crowd wanted to see them as a sexy figure or to be a super serious wrestler. So when Daphne came in and she was a bit in the middle where she just cared about having a really entertaining, layered character that really played on the 90s love of comics, action films, a lot of psychological thrillers that had characters that were really unhinged. I thought that was really cool that WCW actually developed a character like that. And it seemed like every segment Daphne was completely enjoying herself. But as we know, even with everything that Daphne was doing that she enjoyed in WCW, she wasn't, and this is saying it mildly, she wasn't the most liked by Eric Bischoff. He didn't see the point in her character and he really did not like having her on screen. So there were many times where Daphne was put in certain segments that she didn't really get the point of doing because she really was brought in as comic relief, as an unhinged character. And many times she was being brought in to do certain segments that just really didn't make sense for her character, but somehow she would just twist it to have it work for her. So I think that just made me fall in love with Daphne's character even more. So I'm trying to be strategic and not talking about everything that I loved about Daphne and WCW, because I really want to go full blown into her entire career in WCW, on the Indies, and TNA for another show. But I really think, on top of having women like Medusa, Mona, that you have to add Daphne in there, because I think she did help to have a character that people actually thought was cool, male or female, in WCW at that time, that didn't feel like, they're just brought in to get the male fans off. She actually had a character to her, and I will always love Daphne's character. So let's move on to someone that had a lot of interaction with Daphne in WCW, and that would be Miss Hancock. After successfully winning the Nitro Girl search and already gaining a fan base from the moment she stepped into the wrestling business, Stacy Keibler was soon thrust into the spotlight and moved away from being a dancer and instead became an on-screen character. First as an associate for the tag team Standard and Practices, she was marketed as a straight-laced, conservative corporate woman with eyeglasses and a black business suit to match, while also still managing to occasionally dance on top of the commentator's table during the matches. But in 2000, Miss Hancock decided to set her sights on David Flair. She had no qualms about stealing David from his then girlfriend Daphne. And even after successfully snagging David, Miss Hancock still tormented Daphne and turned this into a pretty memorable feud in the summer of 2000. And Stacy's debut match at Bash at the Beach, both women competed in a wedding gown match. Now, just like I stated, there were many times when you had a character like Daphne be put in situations that just did not make sense at all for her character, and this wedding gown match was one. But I must say, due to Daphne's creativity, she made that match so entertaining that it actually made sense that she would be in that type of match. So Miss Hancock and and David Flair continued on with their relationship, and this pairing consisted of David just completely being infatuated with her, and Miss Hancock using that to the fullest extent. After this feud with Daphne and Miss Hancock, things got a bit crazy for Miss Hancock, to say the least. She feuded with Kimberly Page until Kimberly left the promotion, and then had a mud fight with Major Guns, and even right after that, faked a pregnancy. So to say that Miss Hancock lived probably 8 lives in WCW is an understatement. Yes, there were a lot of things that were a bit wacky and straight up soap opera-ish about her time in WCW. One thing for sure is that she was a huge standout in WCW. She definitely separated herself from the rest while still doing segments that, I don't think she probably would have been too excited to do, or probably thought they were a bit weird. She still stood out to the point that she was a big target for WCW, for who should be kept in the business and who should come to WWE once they had the invasion angle. So clearly Stacy was a standout, and she was also still very entertaining once she transitioned into WWE. So she was definitely one to watch during that time. So she had to be a part of this list. So let's move on to someone that's always associated with Stacy Keibler whenever you talk about wrestling, and that is Tori Wilson. Tori Wilson was introduced to the wrestling world when she was asked to walk out with Scott Steiner when she went to watch the wrestling show with her boyfriend. So imagine you being in the audience and then you're asked to go out and perform for the show. I'm pretty sure she was very excited about that, and also very flattered. After that appearance with Scott Steiner, Kevin Nash went to the higher ups and made it clear that he was interested in doing a storyline with Tori Wilson. So she was formally introduced at that point to WC programming after it was revealed that she was brought in by the NWO to seduce David Flair so that he can turn on his father. I thought after I was doing research on this because I couldn't really remember what was Tori Wilson's first showing in WCW, so I had to go back. And after looking at clips of this um, um, introduction with her being involved with David Flair, I actually thought this was a brilliant storyline because they really kept with WCW's efforts to show how conniving, how evil, and how treacherous the NWO was, and how they really just had it in for Ric Flair, and they would do, or in the Four Horsemen as well, where they would really do anything that they could to destroy the confidence and specifically the self-esteem of Ric Flair, to the point where it just felt like they wanted to see this man like completely crumble. And as someone that is a fan of heels, I just thought that was brilliant. Because they knew that there was a way that someone like Tori could get to David to essentially get to Ric Flair in a way that they couldn't, which is that they needed to make Ric feel that he lost everything, but now everything included him losing David Flair, his son, the apple of his eye, because now the only thing that mattered was this woman, Tori. And I just thought that was brilliant because even in the segments where you would see Kevin with Tori and they're mocking that they're clearly playing a game and a trick on David, there's like zero remorse on Tori's front. So I thought that was really cool because sometimes you have the storylines where the women would feel really bad secretly after they got to know how nice this man was, and then they feel bad for their involvement. But Tori didn't care. She didn't care that much. So I thought it was pretty entertaining, and I thought that this was another notch in the NWO's belt to show how vicious they were at even playing with the mind of people. We know about all of the times that NWO was known for using their numbers to really attack people. But I think the mental play that the NWO did with David Flair to get to Ric Flair was absolutely amazing. But in a twist, David and Tori still were an item even after this. And that didn't last as long as David probably would have wanted, because then Tori was caught flirting with Billy Kidman, a young Billy Kidman, in his locker room with the faction that he was a part of, which was the Filthy Animals. And this led to a feud between Kidman and Flair that resulted in Tori turning her back on David. He can't really be surprised because she was brought in to play mind games with him. So you can't really expect her to be loyal to you, bro. And she left with Billy Kidman, and that started off the pairing of Kidman and Tori Wilson. And I thought that even with this group too, Tori actually fit in. So it seemed like every faction that she was a part of, she was able to fit in perfectly and make sense of why she was with them. So fans immediately gravitated to her. I mean, why not? She was a beautiful blonde bombshell, and just like I stated, it fit wherever she was. It didn't seem like she was just there for nothing. So it made sense that the fans got behind her. And of course, in natural Tori Wilson fashion in WCW, her relationship with Billy Kidman didn't last long because she turned her back on him and she eventually started managing Shane Douglas. And that resulted in a feud between Kidman and Douglas that resulted in a very dangerous scaffolding match. And the scaffold was right on top of the entrance. And Kidman had Medusa to be his tag partner. And you had the scaffolding match for what reason, I don't know. These matches, even when you have highly experienced people, usually doesn't go that well because of how dangerous it is and how high up they are. But at this time, WCW really just wanted to keep having matches that were, I guess you could say, specialty matches, but they were essentially just there to try to see if, I guess, maybe let's put this at the end of the show so that we can make sure that people are tuned in. And many times it did not turn out well. So this match would have to be added to that. But even with the scaffolding match, Tori Wilson made a big impact on wrestling fans, and I'm pretty sure that they were very happy to see that even though WCW went out of business in 2001, Tori Wilson immediately had another home when she went to WWE, and it was the same type of fanfare that she received when she was in WCW. And she was very much paired off with Stacy Keibler, and they really made an impact on that ruthless aggression era. First with them immediately competing with Lita and Trish Stratus, but then they went off to do their own things, and Tori Wilson really added something to SmackDown and WWE at that time. So these are, as I mentioned, a lot of women that usually get mentioned in WCW around the 98 through 2001 time. But I wanted to talk about another component and another trend that you kind of saw in WCW around this time. And that was this rise of the bodybuilder, the female bodybuilder phase, where it seemed like they were very big on trying to capitalize on that type of attention that came from that meteoric rise that China had in wrestling, and that shift in perception about women's roles in all of pop culture because of that. And WCW tried to capitalize on that, and they're not the only ones guilty of it. We saw it in ECW too with Nicole Bass. So WCW was obviously going to do that too. And they had two women in particular that really try to capitalize on that. And I will say, after going back and looking, I was kind of impressed with both of them. And if they developed a bit more, if they tried to rearrange them from just being bodybuilders to actually creating what was done perfectly with China, which is that they didn't want her to just be a bodybuilder. Even when she was the enforcer for Triple H, there was still character there. But that's also because prior to coming to WWE, China had done the work to learn about the psychology of wrestling. So yes, she brought the power, but she knew that a great character has to be something that plugs in the fans more than just seeing you for 10 minutes. And then obviously when you come back next week, they kind of lost their attention span for you. So we had two women, one by the name of Midnight that was brought in. I don't know how I feel about that name, guys, but okay. So Midnight was a bodybuilder from Kingston, Jamaica that was brought in to be the sister of Stevie Ray and Booker T. After a while, Midnight started competing with men like Kurt Hennig and Perry Saturn. Men that did not want to probably ever fight a woman in the ring. But I personally think when Midnight had these matches, she really did hold her own. And that you can really tell in real time how the fans felt about that, because they were really getting behind Midnight when she was in these matches. I think that she had really good chemistry with Stevie Ray and Booker T. It seemed like they actually really liked working with her too. But from what has been put on the internet, I think that Midnight started becoming a bit disenchanted with WCW and the politics that go with the business. Specifically, one of the biggest issues with wrestling at that particular time, which was that you had a lot of women that were very ambitious and they wanted to be taken seriously in these companies, but that wasn't the goal of a lot of the bookers at that time. And also, something that you're seeing being mentioned a lot now, the drastic change or the drastic look of pay for women versus men, especially how a lot of women were getting paid more when they were mostly eye candy. They were getting a lot of perks to their contracts. A lot of things were being paid for more, like travel expenses, costuming, which usually women, on-screen talent have to pay for on their own, and obviously a bump in pay that a lot of other women, more the wrestlers, the female wrestlers, were not getting. So I think all of those things probably, from what I've read as I try to do research on Midnight, was a contributing factor, a huge factor into her just leaving WCW. So she was there for a very short time. But I do think that, especially the way the fans were behind her, and it seemed like she really took it seriously. She, I think, on her own, she decided to train at the power plant, which was WCW's training facility. So I think she was really passionate about the wrestling business, and actually, it did show. So even though WCW may have brought her in to kind of be the answer to having a bodybuilder come into WCW to kind of compete with WWE, I think that she just liked wrestling in general and she wanted to get involved. So for the time that she was there, I think that she did make an impact. The second woman that we have that was also brought in for that bodybuilder look was Asia. In March of 1999, Asia was another woman who was brought in for her unique strong woman look and began working with Ric Flair. She was brought in as Ric Flair's nurse to take care of him when he was in a mental institution. Look, guys, for the fans who were not born during this time or may have never seen this, I, as someone that was a wrestling fan at this time, cannot at all defend some of the storylines that WCW had. I was not a part of these boards. I was not a part of the creative team, so I cannot defend it. Okay, but that was Asia's role. She was Nurse Asia to Ric Flair as he was getting better and as he was in the loony bin. So it was rumored that Asia received her name to kind of play on China, to say that Asia is bigger than China. You get it? Yeah. So I don't know if that's completely true, but if it is, I can kind of believe it, especially because I believe at this time, this was when Russo was writing for WCW, and Russo had a big part to play in the writing of China, the presenting of China on WWE programming. So because he didn't leave on the best terms with WWE as far as having bitterness, I think that could be possible, that that name stemmed from trying to poke at China. So soon after Asia started having these segments with Ric Flair, she added a wrestler to her resume and had matches against Medusa. She actually challenged Medusa for the Cruiserweight title, and that match was actually pretty good. It seemed like Medusa and Asia had a bit of chemistry. It wasn't the longest title match, but it showed that Asia had promise. And after that, Asia had some short feuds with Kimberly Page, Tori Wilson, etc. But these were all typical to having these short stints that didn't really result in much with the women. But you could at least see as a fan whether these women had potential or not. And I think that Asia could have. I felt it a little bit more with Midnight, but I feel that even though these women were brought in for gimmicks, it seemed like they really took it seriously to look impressive in the ring. So that's why I would say I wouldn't, bash this trend that a lot of companies had to just bring in female bodybuilders with WCW in particular, because these women actually showed that they cared about the business and there was a level of respect. So that's why I wanted to add them into this list of the women that were involved in WCW at the time, because even if you're not getting the type of segments or angles or storylines that you prefer, if you're showing that you have a passion for it, then you definitely deserve to be known as a contributor to WCW during this time. And let's see, we have Miss Paisley, which is later known as Charmel, but even before she was known as Charmel, she was Storm on the Nitro Girls. And around 2000, Storm started to evolve into an on-screen talent and became Paisley, and she managed wrestlers like Prince Aoki and The Artist, and she really helped this talent, these men, to come off as really exciting for the crowd. Even if sometimes the fans weren't really into these wrestlers, Paisley's personality and her dynamic with the talent, you can really see that she gelled with these guys and she really wanted to make sure that she was framing them properly. That many times helped them to get over with the fans. So she was a huge attribute and plus to anyone that she was managing at the time. And that transitioned into Paisley becoming a fan favorite when she would have short stints as a wrestler, because she went to the power plant. She was a part of that group of women that were sent to the power plant. And from what I saw in this really great documentary, I think it's about an hour long, about women in WCW, there was a segment where Medusa was talking about how good Charmel was, Paisley. She has had like 1,000 names. How good Paisley was in the ring, and how she really caught on very quickly to wrestling, and how attentive she is, how she really was passionate about getting good in the ring and developing a really good character. So, and you could see that Paisley really had all of the things that you would need to become a really great wrestler. She really knew how to build a character. She really knew how to interact with the fans, either to have them hate her or love her. She had really good chemistry with other wrestlers. She knew what worked for them. As when she would manage them, she really knew what to bring out in them to make them shine. So I think that Paisley was a really strong contributor to women's involvement in wrestling. And of course, we know about everything that she did after her stint in WCW. So this just goes to show that when Paisley was in WCW, be it when she was with the Nitro Girls, when she was managing, when she had her time to wrestle, every single task that she was given, every single evolution in her career, she always shined. So she, of course, has to be included in this. I think the last woman that I'm going to bring up, only because not last for any disrespect to her character, but last because just like we kept seeing with a lot of these women, many times they did not have long stints, but many times they could have had a huge impact or had memorable things that made you as a fan feel like you wanted to see more of. I'm going to talk about Leah Meow. Leah Meow came from a very controversial stint in ECW, managing the likes of Raven, and she was known as Kimona Wanalea. Yep, Kimona Wanalea. Y'all can go back to Paul Heyman, okay, ask him why he gave these women this name, because y'all not gonna come for me for it. This was a different time, and everyone was trying to capitalize on the same type of popularity as Howard Stern. But when she came to WCW, she had a name change and overall change to her look in the second life in WCW. Her look and persona as she was managing the Young Dragons in WCW was a dominatrix persona, and for such a petite stature, with her with all the leather and tight and thigh-high boots and a riding crop that she would bring to the ring, it really showed that WCW at that time was fully trying to go into having risque shows and characters that went probably against the lower, maybe like PG or PG, I would say PG or PG-13 rating that they had prior to that, when they wouldn't show certain things. Like for instance, just like I was mentioning the week prior with the Nitro Girl show, WCW had to be really careful that they could show things that were a bit sexy, but they could not go too far. But clearly around the time that Leia came to WCW, that was completely forgotten about. And the reason why I think she's memorable is not because of obviously them trying to make her super sexual. It was because I think that you have to go back to the 2000s. At that time, you did not have that many female managers that would be physical. When they would come to the ring, they would just simply clap, stand in the corner, and wait for any time that they could possibly take the ref's attention away, but never by using any type of physical contact with anyone. So with Leia, she actually did. She would do full body presses off the top rope, hurricanranas. She didn't get Frankensteiners. She would actually do that. And everyone talks about Lita's hurricanrana when she came to WWE. But I think it was also just as impressive when Leia did that, because she was showing that even though she was not a seasoned wrestler, she didn't mind putting her her life on the line to make sure that her team won. And not only that, they had to hold up the same standard that she did. Like if she did that, then they had to put in a harder fight, and she demanded that they did to get the win. So I thought that that was impressive with her, and I think that that could have led to her possibly being a very strong manager at the time. But she was also a victim of something that a lot of women went through toward, I believe it was the mid 2000s, which was the huge layoff that happened. Excuse me, I think that was 2001 actually. There was a huge layoff of wrestlers because of roster cuts. But as we know, because this happened in WWE too around 1995, whenever they have roster cuts, usually the women are cut first. And that's exactly what happened with Leia. So though she had a short stint, I think that showcasing of a female manager that wasn't just going to pretty much be in the role of a valet with a clap where their guy or their faction is doing well, and then of course they look sad when anything was happening. She wanted to kind of evolve that and really be hands-on with making sure that her team won. I thought that was pretty impressive to show off those high-flying moves that in America you weren't seeing that much of, even from the female wrestlers. So that is a big reason why I wanted to have her on the list. I did say that Leia was last, but I have to add one more woman that was very, very much attached to that 2000-2001 reiteration of what the women represented in WCW, and that was Major Guns. In late 1999, Major Guns joined WCW simply as an NWO girl. And if you don't know what that was, NWO many times when you would have parties or just having the segments when they really just wanted to show off how much they were not taking these matches that they had seriously, and most of the time they were just partying, but backstage, they would just randomly bring women who were either usually fitness models or what have you, and they would have their moment to have their backstage segments with these women. So Major Guns was brought in for that. Then it started to evolve into her doing backstage interviews, and then soon she started managing teams like Misfits in Action, but her most memorable time was actually being a part of Team Canada with their as a manager, and Team Canada was led by Lance Storm, who is, of course, one of the best wrestlers that you've seen at that time, but just in general, he is one of the best wrestlers that has ever been on ECW, WCW, or WWE programming. And I think that with Major Guns going to Team Canada, they were trying to kind of push her more, and she had matches. Probably one of the most memorable ones was against Tigress and Miss Hancock. And I think because I really love the team of Team Canada because they had such strong wrestlers like Lance Storm and Elix Skipper, who doesn't get enough credit for how innovative he was at that time. I think that she had a good thing there, and it really helped her to get popularity being a part of a team that was that revolutionary. They were doing things that were very exciting for the crowd. And to me, amongst all the chaos that was going on in 2000 and 2001 in that company, with just having over the top unnecessary things toward that last part of WCW's tenure, for Team Canada to be that spot on for what fans wanted at that time, including a lot of them going into the early time of TNA and bringing that same type of showmanship, really want to prove how they had something good in Team Canada, even in WCW. So for Major Guns to be a part of that, I think that it helped to make her feel like her career was moving forward. But just like I said, whenever you have a wrestling company, usually when they need to do budget cuts, usually women are the first to go. And if I'm correct, I think that Major Guns was a part of the group of women that were fired during that time. So not a long career there, but I think with her work with Misfits in Action, and then certainly with the Team Canada faction, she did have a very interesting part to play in WCW. So that is what I have for this week. And I hope with everything that I've talked about with women in WCW in the 90s and early 2000s, that you could see that they used the opportunities that they had to the best of their ability to create some great moments in wrestling. There are many things that can be debated about, was this help to women's wrestling or did it set it back? And my opinion of that is that the many things that we like right now as women that are fans of wrestling, if you take out a lot of things that, yes, they're pretty cringy to watch now, especially a lot of women that were managers in WCW at the time, there are so many things that were stellar and that do deserve to get attention. You're also seeing, especially with everyone now having a podcast and talking about their experiences in different companies, including WCW, that many times there just wasn't a choice, with what they could do. But even you're seeing that even when they didn't have choices, they somehow were still able to make very memorable matches. Really try to push to have well thought out characters, even when they would have setbacks like not being booked every week or having the rug pulled underneath them where certain feuds would just stop. They still made sure that to this day, we're still talking about them. So that is the point of having this full month dedicated to WCW and the women that help to make it great, because many times, especially during this women's evolution that you saw for the past maybe 5 years, usually the women that were in WCW get left out of it. And I think that they should be included, especially because there were a lot of things that were super cringy about the involvement of women in WWE, but they're always getting the pass now. And it's valid that they didn't have a lot of say in what was going on with the writing. And that is true. So we have to apply the same thing to WCW. If you see that the passion for wrestling was there, that they had, and that they still tried to pull through despite having these many setbacks with how women in general were viewed and what their role should be in wrestling. So I hope that you enjoyed this entire month of us taking a time machine back to WCW in the 90s and early 2000s, and really just to pay homage to these awesome women and to see all the things that many times I actually forgot a lot of things that they contributed to WCW. And as we go into December, we're going to have a lot of highlights of what great things happen in modern day for women's wrestling in 2022. So look forward to that. More articles on great matches, either from the past or present for women's wrestling. But this has been a great month of going back and doing a lot of research on WCW and the women's involvement in it. So I truly hope that you enjoy this month. And as we move into December, we have some great things that will be coming. So, just stay tuned.